Hello, welcome to An Imperfectly Perfect Life, Life Unscripted. I'm your host, Shari Lead, and today I have a guest and we have a topic that I can't wait to discuss with her because this is something I've been working on for the last almost 2 years now to develop healthy relationships for myself. And what we're going to talk about today is something that I never thought described me. And when I found out what it really meant, and well, a little bit textbook over here, I started working on it because just like all of us, I want healthier relationships. And so what we're talking about today is codependency. Now, before I dove into what codependency really is, I thought, there's no way I'm codependent. I went to law school. I've started businesses. I do things by myself. I was confusing being independent in much of my life with codependency as if they were opposite things, and they aren't. They're mutually exclusive behaviors or items or things or descriptions. And you can be an independent, successful man or woman and still be codependent in your relationships. So we're going to dive in. And I usually don't have notes except for when I'm introducing a guest because I don't want to forget anything as I introduce them. So I'm going to pick up my notes and introduce you to today's guests. So today, I'm beyond excited to introduce Connie Curlett. She's a licensed psychotherapist and certified coach based in Seattle's Madison Valley neighborhood. Connie blends therapy and coaching in a way that's straight shooting, compassionate, and thankfully for me and probably for you, infused with both humor and grace. She helps people heal, discover themselves, and yes, learn what healthy relationships actually look like. She's also a community leader, a lifelong volunteer, and mom to 3 adult kids. But don't let her resume fool you. She's not your sit back and nod kind of therapist. Connie brings insight with a bite of empathy and clarity and honesty, with a dash of, you might laugh at how deeply this hits. So, if you've ever been told that you're too nice, too needed, or just doing the most, pull up a chair. This one's for you. Here's my conversation with the brilliant and refreshingly real Connie Curlett. Connie, I'm so excited to talk to you. I've been thinking about this all day. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Connie, can you share a little bit about your background? We are going to talk today about codependency and share a little bit of your background so listeners know why I came to you to help me with this codependency issue that I'm going to disclose that I found out that I have.
Yeah, well, gosh, I'll try to keep it short. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, as well as a certified life coach. I've been working with, individuals, couples, and some companies for about 17 years now. And basically, I help people improve their relationships, moving them from kind of an unhealthy place to a healthier place. And whether that's a relationship they have with their partner, uh, family member, coworkers, friends, or the relationship with themselves. I firmly believe that the more you improve the relationships in your life, the better your life is. So that's,
Absolutely. And I talk about connection all the time. That's what it is. It's all relationships, all this artificial intelligence and technology, they can't replace human relationships. Um, and so I am so curious about codependency. This is season 3 of this podcast, and this season is all about me reinventing myself at this age, totally moving cities, starting all over, finding friends, starting my business in a new city, and at some point, it will also involve dating and new relationships. Um, and it was really interesting when I was going through my divorce, which I filed in 2023, finalized just January of 2025. I did like a lot of people going through a divorce. They start to read, about what the heck happened here. Where did this go wrong? And what my responsibility was in it all. And I came across codependency.
Mhm.
And I was shocked. It's not what I thought it was. And I always looked at codependency. My definition before was, oh, that's somebody that just says yes to everything. They're dependent. It's a weak personality. That's the judgment I had about it. And as I read more about what codependency, how it shows up, what it looks like, it started to look very familiar to who I am. So can you give us your definition of codependency?
Yeah, codependency at its core is when somebody gives too much of themselves into a relationship and at the same time receiving very little in return, right? And so they may have a pattern of trying to fix or save their partner. Um, they take on the role of making their partner happy, which we all know that doesn't, go
Hmm.
doesn't really work. And they do that at the expense of their own happiness a lot of the times. Um, at the real core stem of codependency is a fear of abandonment. So it's not really weak.
Really?
It's a fear of abandonment and kind of validating, seeking validation. And
Hmm.
let's face it, we all need validation. We all want validation. But when it's at, you're sacrificing too much of yourself to get that, then you need to look at that. And so that's kind of what the kind of broad definition of codependency
And
is.
I have no questions written out. So this is an organic conversation. So the reaction of my mouth dropping open when you said abandonment is real because the whole talk I give, my whole discussion about traveling the US to all 50 states is searching for belonging. And my backstory being I was literally abandoned as a child and found orphaned, in a cardboard box. And so, when you say, that stems or that could be the root of a codependent, is it a behavior or a personality type or?
I think it's more of a behavior because you can change. You can it to, it's not a personality disorder, but it is a behavioral issue that once you kind of recognize it, then you can kind of move away from it. But it takes a lot of self-talk and, sort of self-connection to get to that place. Because a person who is codependent most likely is disconnected from themselves and
Mm.
don't have a strong sense of who they are, or and even if they do have a strong sense of who, they don't hold to it.
You
They
could say anything. You won't offend me. You can be honest with me.
well, it's adhering to your, or being loyal. That's it. It's more being loyal to who you are versus being loyal to the other, to whoever it is. And we all, to be healthy, we have to be loyal to ourselves first. And what that means is being loyal to your own personal values. We all have at our core, all healthy people, I believe, at our core have things that we believe in, values that we want to live our life by. And that is like, say, kindness. If you're going to be with me, you're going to have to be kind or respectful or trustworthy, right? And somebody, so two healthy people help each other be better people. They help each other keep in check. Like, hey, that was hurtful, or that was disrespectful. And the other person's like, okay, I'm sorry, you're right. And then they get back on the same page of kind of a agreement of the rules of engagement in their relationship. But with codependency, what will happen at times is they're willing to give up those core values. They're non-negotiables. They're willing to negotiate them, or they're willing to give that up. well, they're so nice in these other areas, or, they kind of either justify the bad behavior of the other, or they believe when the other person tries to justify the bad behavior. They'll go along with it because of the fear of, well, I don't know what else is out there, or the fear of being alone. I mean, it's just all fear driven more than, based in love. So they will, kind of give up those core values for, to stay in the relationship. And that's where codependency kind of hangs out. So,
Yeah. It
to,
sounds like you're talking about boundaries. Is
yeah,
that a different thing, or is that just, or is that one of the same where somebody doesn't either know their boundaries or know how to stand up and say, "Hey, that's a boundary that you're crossing."
absolutely. People who are codependent really struggle with saying no. They feel like they'll be a bad person, or, they're very aware of the perception of the other person being seen in a bad light, and so part of, not being able to hold the boundary or say no is falls kind of in that. And it is a boundary, when somebody crosses a non-negotiable, like, being disrespectful or unkind, you have to be able to say, that's not okay, right? And it's showing that you value yourself, right? And so when you don't have that strong value of yourself, then it's easy to just kind of, not hold the boundary. So
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and a lot of this came up because, if you find out your role in something and you stop being that codependent, and like at least in my case, you stop those actions, and all of a sudden you see like maybe the other person fall apart, or they're not, you realize, oh my goodness, you've been doing so much work to hold everything together to make it at least look good on one side. And I was trying to figure out, okay, where did this come from for me? Yes, I could go back to my history of being orphaned and adopted, and that's kind of the low-hanging fruit there. But I also was raised by Japanese Americans who were born, there's a generation between us. So they were born in the 20s. Uh, so they come from a very duty filled culture and a duty fulfilled generation. And they were very religious. They were born again Christians. And so there was duty on top of that. And I know for me, I catch myself thinking, okay, I don't want someone else to feel bad. Like I take on, and I did this in a recent relationship I was in, rather than do say no, I don't want to do this, or this is not how I want to spend my time, or sacrificing my time because I didn't want the other person to feel bad. And I think that is that codependency, right? Is that what that is?
have an overwhelming need for approval and reassurance that falls right into them, right? You don't want to disappoint the other. It's all about the other, and very little, focus on yourself, your own needs, your own connection to yourself, you know, and that, your lens, you're just kind of heavily weighted on the other. It's all about the other. So, yeah, that
And it's
falls.
so interesting because I do a lot for I mean, externally, I do a lot. I have this podcast, I write for articles, I speak. And so I'm very functioning, and I always have been a high functioning, high achieving person. So that's why I didn't think I could be codependent, because that's not what I thought it would externally look at. But I'm thinking, oh, I'm actually a really good codependent, a closet codependent, for lack of better words, if there's such a thing.
Yeah, well, you just got to take a look at, are you internally motivated in terms of, if I do a job, I want to do it right, and, kind of driven internally, or is it externally motivated?
Oh,
Parents will think, what will people think? Or if I get to a certain status, then I'll be somebody. Or, you just really have to see where that is. And you want to move it to a more internal, driven place. And usually if you're internally motivated, there's a lot more self-compassion.
Mm.
okay, I may not know how to do this right, but I'm going to give it a try. If I, don't hit the mark, well, I've learned something so that I can, do better next time. There's just a lot of, just, yeah, just compassion in it. Where externally motivated, that's where perfectionism hangs out. That's, where you're embarrassed. There's, wow, I should have done it better. I should have known better. I should have, been able to knock it out of the park the first time. And there's just very little self-compassion and really heavily weighted on what other people think versus how you feel about yourself.
I love using that tool because my question was going to be, well, how do you notice the difference between, being codependent versus being just supportive? And you answered it right there, with when you want to support someone so you might negotiate what you want to do because you want to be supportive of that other person. That feels good because that's a good internal reason for doing something for someone else versus sacrificing what you actually want to do because you're afraid that person might reject you. That would be an external um, reason for doing something. And that would be the difference, I think, from your definition, between being supportive and codependent. Am I picking that up correctly?
Yeah, yeah, and always kind of keep a gauge on, is this, am I doing this at the detriment of myself, right? That's, a pretty big sign. If yes, we all have to, sacrifice some of our time or energy or whatever for other people in our life. That's a given. But when it's too much, when it does all come back to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. If you are out of air, you cannot help somebody else, right? So really keeping an eye on, where's my tank? Do I have enough to give? And we've grown up in a society, and we've certainly all heard the messaging of, don't be selfish, be there for the other, and all of that. And that's a good person when you can sacrifice and give to the other. But it can lead to codependency. It can lead to depleting yourself or becoming a martyr, or, some unhealthy behaviors versus, making sure that you've, done enough self-care so that you can be there for your loved ones and people in your life, but never at the detriment of yourself where it's, unhealthy.
And I could see this happening with motherhood. Is codependency something that can show up later in life? Not like you're not like, oh, this person's wired for this, and you could start seeing it happen at age 2. Oh, they're going to be a codependent. Or is it something where maybe get into motherhood, and of course it's all this giving, giving, giving because your child is, you have to have this baby survive, but then you continue to do that instead of letting that child fly. They call that helicopter parenting, maybe. So is codependency something that can develop later in life?
You know, the way I look at it is anytime you let fear run the show, and so there may be something that can have happened along the way in your life that sends you in this kind of fear-based place. And
Mm.
the answer would probably be, yeah, I think it can, if you're not aware that fear is taking over your life and everything's kind of out of the lens of fear. You want to have a healthy relationship with fear, and what that looks like is fear is your friend. It's supposed to be like a backseat driver that just says caution ahead, right? And you're like, oh, thank you. Now get in the back seat. But if you're not careful, it flies out of the back seat, and now it's driving, your car, and everything's through the lens of fear. And you have to make a decision for yourself. Do I want fear driving my car, or do I want love, peace, joy, happiness to, dictate, kind of where I go in life? So I think that it's just, we all have to have our own relationship with fear, and, how much do you want it taken over your life? So I think that it's just rooted in fear. So to keep an eye on that, and just say, how much am I, doing things out of fear?
This seems like a good exercise to journal about if it's an issue, because it's hard to necessarily recognize it unless you intentionally think about. I mean, for me, writing really helps, and so I'm a journal person. So right now, I'm starting to think about this, and I have in the last year and a half about codependency and boundaries, and I've become a lot better at saying, "Hey, this is not, the old Shari would have gone along at least, five more times before I actually ended up building resentment, and anger inside and blew up, as opposed to early on saying, no, this is not what I want to do, or just no, I don't have time. So I have like strides ahead, but it is interesting and it's something I like to journal with prompts
Mhm.
or around certain topics. And the way I started journaling was back in, how old was I? It was the year before I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was 46 when I started journaling. And it was because I wanted to take judgment out of my life as much as possible. My reaction to judgment of me, which maybe that was the start of my issues. I didn't know about codependency that back then, but my and then my judgment of other people. So I started specifically journaling about when judgment was showing up in my life, and that was a game changer for me because it showed me how many times that I would let something affect me, or I was saying things that were judgmental just out of habit or not paying attention, but it was still sinking in and affecting me. So things like this, as you talk about this, I'm starting to think, okay, at this point, I don't know that I have those things motivating me as much, but it'd be interesting to find out. And the way I would find out is start journaling about fear. I made these, is what's stopping me, just to identify and be more aware. That's how I would do it. Are there other tools that you suggest to people?
Judgment, because that is another area where codependency shows up in terms of people who are typically codependent have very little self-compassion, right? And so they're hard on themselves. Their inner critic, their inner self-talk is like an inner bully in a lot of ways, and they're also judgmental of themselves and others. And so that is something to pay attention to. And so, in ways of kind of healing, I guess, from codependency, one is to be able to set proper boundaries, like we just talked about, but also increase your self compassion. And so that is like making a agreement with yourself that you will only speak to yourself as you would a good friend, right?
Mm.
And not anything less than that. And so even if you're struggling, the last thing you need is somebody beating up on you. You need to say, hey, girl, I see you struggling. It's going to be okay. Just put one foot in front of the other. You got this, that kind of thing, because that's what you would say to a friend who stopped by who was having a hard time. So you really want to, just change your inner, I call it your inner roommate. You
Mhm.
have a mean inner roommate. You got to get rid of that one and bring in, somebody you like to hang with, somebody that's kind to you, that, to go through life with, somebody that is by your side in your corner. So that is definitely an area that, there's just no room for judgment.
Yeah, and I imagine if, so people who are listening and have started to follow me, a lot of people are going through some type of reinvention journey, often because of my hashtags and the different podcasts I've been interviewed on lately. It's a divorce, and now it's the great gray divorce, which is there's different definitions. Some say 45 and older. 45 seems too young to me, but at least like 50 and older, right? Getting divorced. And if someone's at that point or they're thinking about it and they recognize as we're talking that despite how successful they are externally and all the good things that they're doing in their world, they may also be exhibiting codependency behavior in their personal life. And if that's true and they start to recognize this and change that and set boundaries, I've got to say they have to also be aware that the other person that they're in this relationship with, there's a good chance that they may not be ready for them to change because their life is probably pretty good if they're the recipient of somebody who's codependent is really caring for them and kind of curtailing to their needs at the detriment of their own sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. In any dysfunctional relationship, when one person starts to get healthier, the other person's going to kick up a lot of dust because this worked for me. Get back over here. This is how we do it, right? And so there's a lot of pull to the status quo of what it used to be. And so sometimes that's when you're really actually on the right track. Things get kicked up in your relationship, and either the person rises to your level, your new level of health, or they don't, and people grow apart and they go their separate ways because there's a values clash. There's there's a pull to keep it unhealthy. So and a lot of times people just get too exhausted and kind of go back to oh, this is too hard, versus holding that line, which is really hard to hold in the face of somebody else kind of falling apart, or doing, and the more you kind of hold that line, the more the antics kind of kick up, the more the drama kind of kicks up. So and it's really hard to kind of manage that, but sticking with it is the kind of hard right thing to do.
I have to say, from a personal standpoint, my speaking coach, Craig Valentine, I've taken this phrase from him and I use it all the time is, don't let good stop you from becoming great. And for me, I was in a good marriage, a really good marriage, and people were surprised. And even now, I'm in a rental house. We sold our family home, and it's good where I am. But I'm going to this new city, Dallas, where I have no anchor there. Buying a home by myself for the first time. Going to start my career, establish retreats for women, and to teach, this type of thing, to connect to yourself first, then your family or career, then your community, and become leaders when they know, who they are. And doing all of this stuff with less, but it feels great. So I was allowing good, and the fear, you talked about fear, stopped me from becoming great. And I do feel like this greatness. And it's not easy, and there's a lot of fear there. And I understand why people go back or are afraid to make this change, especially even I think when if you've been codependent for so long, you have it's your it becomes sort of your identity, this thing you've created and you've worked so hard for. It's your identity, whether it's a good marriage or the relationships you have with your friends or whatever it is. It's your identity. Maybe you're the friend that's always there for everybody. The friend that always throws the birthday parties or whatever it is. It's scary, but it definitely is so much happier and feels so much better when you come home to yourself.
Absolutely. And, you're absolutely right in terms of people will take on that instead of being kind of the star of the show in their own life, they always play the supporting role. And, what can happen is at the end of your life, you look back and you didn't live your life, you lived somebody else's life. And that, that can be, kind of sad and lonely, actually. But to take kind of that starting role in your life, and move forward. It does take a lot of courage to do that. And codependent people in general are filled with self doubt. They're easily manipulated. They're easily kind of believe kind of whoever is that they're trying to save or fix or whatever, or whoever's controlling that, or them giving up their power and control to the other person. They believe that instead of believing their own kind of inner voice or strength, or even seeing that they have any. So, yeah, it's not easy navigating out of that, but it is the healthy thing to do.
Mhm. One of my favorite quotes, and I learned recently that Steve Jobs said this at a commencement speech. I don't know if he was the first one to say it, but if today were the last day of your life, would you be doing what you're doing now?
Mhm.
And once you recognize these behavioral patterns and recognize your worth And therefore, when you realize your worth, seeing boundaries, all of a sudden it's like, of course those are. It seems so obvious at that point when you see what you've been sacrificing. And then to ask yourself that question, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to be doing what I'm doing now? And for me, that was a big motivator to decide, okay, this is not like dress rehearsal. This is the real thing. And and partly maybe being a cancer survivor also, really brings that home when you're in your 50s, like, let's do this now because this is definitely halfway through plus. So well, thank you so much. And Connie, how can people get a hold of you? You said you also coach. Is one your coaching or your counseling practice? Is there one that's more dominant than the other, or is it a mixture of both practices?
A mixture of both, and everybody can just find me, conniecurlett.com. It's pretty straightforward, or I have Instagram as well, and working on posting more. That's always a challenge. But I think I'm pretty easy to find. And I also want to say that when people are, working through codependency, there are support groups out there. There's Codependent No More, or different, things that, look up different groups maybe in your area, get professional help and support. It's really hard to just go it alone, and that you even should have an expectation that, oh, I should just be able to just do this. It's not that easy, and getting support is wonderful way of moving forward and getting and hearing kind of new messaging, which is probably goes against your own, or what you've heard. So I just want to put a plug in for people to get the support they need.
And for some reason, as you're talking about these support groups, I was thinking, oh, they're probably a bunch of really nice people if they're all codependent. I think, oh, if they have a potluck, everyone's going to bring something really nice. Yeah. You
Yeah.
meet your tribe there. Oh, that's great, though. That absolutely is great, and it's common. It's not like an uncommon behavior pattern being codependent. And I'm glad that people are talking about it a lot more now and realizing that it doesn't mean you're weak when if you've developed this pattern or that you're deficient or it's as you point out, it's not a personality issue, it's a behavioral issue. Um,
It can come from all kinds of different places. So, to have a lot of compassion, for yourself kind of going through it, or others, and not see it as a weakness, of others, but, just a struggle for sure.
Well, I'm looking forward to this new reinvention chapter of non-codependent Shari as I head to Dallas. And I really, really appreciate this conversation. This actually, I've talked about it a little bit with people, but not with a professional, and really appreciate just listen to I'm going to listen to this podcast and learn something again.
Great. Well, I'm cheering you on, Shari, and good luck with your new adventures. And, I look forward to following you, and see where your journey goes.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Thank you for joining me this week. In the show notes, I have Connie's contact information, which is conniecurlett.com with two T's. Also in the show notes, I have a few links. One of the links is to the weekly connection emails. These are emails that have challenges and tools to connect to the world around you, to make friends as adults, which is not always easy, or also to deepen friendships. So feel free to sign up for those. One email per week. You can unsubscribe at any time, no strings attached. Also, if you're interested in my women's retreat, 3-day retreat, Flip the Box retreat, while other retreats take you away, this one brings you home to yourself. So check out those links in the show notes, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Take care.